I'm 68 years old now, living in Cleveland, but I was born in Pripyat, where everything I lost is still buried. In April of 1986, I was 28, working as a maintenance electrician assigned to auxiliary systems connected to Unit 4 during the Chernobyl disaster. My father, Mykola Hrytsenko, had died just 2 years earlier and was buried in the Pripyat cemetery on the outskirts of the city. My mother, Halina Hrytsenko, was 52 at the time, stubborn, deeply traditional, and unwilling to abandon what she believed was sacred ground. When evacuation orders finally came, too late and wrapped in half-truths, I knew we had to leave immediately. She refused. On April 27th, as buses lined the streets and loudspeakers repeated instructions, I begged her to come with me. Radiation levels were already surging, though no one would say it outright. She stood in the doorway of our apartment on Kurchatova Street, calm in a way that terrified me more than panic ever could. "Your father is here," she told me. "I won't leave him alone." I argued. I shouted. I even tried to physically pull her out, but she held her ground. Before I boarded that bus alone, she embraced me and said something that has echoed in my mind for 4 decades. "Go live your life. Live it for both of us." That was the last time I saw her alive. In the years that followed, I rebuilt my life in America, eventually settling in Cleveland, working long hours, raising a family, trying to bury the past. Official narratives shifted over time, pointing to figures like Valery Legasov and internal failures within the system. But none of that changed what happened to the people who stayed behind, or those who were left behind. The exclusion zone became a place of silence, overgrown and haunted. I told myself my mother had died quickly, that she hadn't suffered. It was the only way to keep going. Then, in early 2026, just weeks before the 40th anniversary, Ukrainian recovery teams made a discovery at the old cemetery in Pripyat. They found human remains lying beside my father's grave. It was her. Clutched in her hand was a sealed letter, somehow preserved against time and decay. It was addressed to me. In it, she wrote not only about her final days, but about something she believed with absolute certainty, that the disaster wasn't just an accident, not just the result of flawed design or human error, but the consequence of a decision made deliberately by someone higher up, someone whose name she had overheard in whispers before the evacuation. A name I had never heard before. And now, at 68 years old, I'm left holding that letter, trying to decide if uncovering that truth will finally bring me peace or destroy what little of it I have left. My name is Andrei Hrytsenko, and this is the story of what happened to my mother, what happened to me, and what I discovered 40 years too late. Before I go any further into what that letter said and what it means, I need to ask you something. If you're watching this right now, subscribe to this channel. Just click that red button below. Because what I'm about to reveal has never been said in any official documentary, in any government-approved history book. Only those who were there, only those who saw it with their own eyes can tell you this truth. And I was there. I saw it. My mother stayed there. And she left behind proof. So, subscribe and come back with me now to April of 1986, to the city that no longer exists, to the moment everything changed forever. I keep a photograph on my desk here in Cleveland. It was taken in the summer of 1983, 3 years before the disaster. My father is standing in front of our apartment building, arm around my mother, both of them smiling like they had no idea what was coming. My father worked as a senior pipe fitter at the Chernobyl plant for nearly 15 years. He was proud of that job, proud of what the plant represented. Progress, Soviet engineering, the future. He used to tell me stories at dinner about the reactors, about how they were the most advanced in the world, how safe they were, how Pripyat was a city built for the future. He believed every word. So did I. I followed him into that world. Not into the reactor halls themselves, but into the electrical systems that kept everything running. I was trained at the Kiev Polytechnic Institute, graduated in 1979, and was assigned to Pripyat in 1981. By 1986, I had been working there for 5 years, mostly on routine maintenance, checking transformers, monitoring backup power systems, replacing worn cables. It was steady work, predictable, and it paid well. My father had passed away suddenly in February of 1984 from a heart attack. He collapsed at home one evening while reading the newspaper. My mother found him. She never really recovered from that loss. She became quieter, more withdrawn, spending hours at the cemetery every week, tending to his grave, talking to him as if he could still hear her. She refused to leave Pripyat, even for short visits to see relatives in Kiev. "This is where he is," she would say. "This is where I belong." I lived with her in that same apartment on Kurchatova Street. It was a standard Soviet block, 5 floors, narrow hallways, thin walls. But it was home. We had neighbors who became like family. There was Ludmila on the 3rd floor, a school teacher who always had tea ready. There was Victor, a young engineer who had just married and was expecting his first child. There was old Petro, a pensioner who sat on the bench outside every evening, smoking and telling stories about the war. It was a small community, tight-knit, and we all believed we were safe. We believed the plant was safe. We believed the government when they told us everything was under control. We were wrong. On April 25, 1986, I reported for my shift at 6 in the evening. It was a Friday, and the city felt relaxed, almost festive. Spring had arrived, and the trees around Pripyat were beginning to bloom. People were out walking, children were playing in the parks, and there was talk of the upcoming May Day celebrations. I remember stopping at a kiosk on the way to work and buying my mother a small bouquet of tulips. She loved tulips. I left them on the kitchen table with a note saying I'd be back in the morning. That was the last normal thing I did. My assignment that night was routine. Monitor auxiliary electrical panels near the turbine hall, check voltage levels, ensure backup systems were functional. The plant was running a safety test on Reactor 4, something about testing whether the turbines could provide enough power during a shutdown to keep coolant pumps running until the diesel generators kicked in. I didn't pay much attention to the details. It wasn't my department. My job was just to make sure the electrical grid stayed stable. I clocked in, grabbed my toolbox, and headed to my station near the cable tunnels that ran beneath the turbine hall. The air down there always smelled like oil and ozone, and the hum of transformers was so constant you stopped hearing it after a while. I was alone for most of the shift, which was normal. Around 11 at night, I heard voices echoing from somewhere above. Engineers arguing, someone shouting instructions. I didn't think much of it. Tests always involved a lot of back and forth. But then, just after midnight, I felt it. A vibration. Not loud, not violent, just a low, deep tremor that seemed to come from the earth itself. I looked up at the ceiling, at the pipes running overhead, and for a second, everything went still. Then, at exactly 1:23 in the morning on April 26th, the floor beneath my feet stopped being solid. There was a sound, like thunder trapped underground, like metal tearing, like the world breaking apart from the inside. The lights flickered, went out, then came back on, dim and red. Emergency alarms started screaming. I ran. I didn't think. I just ran toward the exit, stumbling over cables, my ears ringing, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. When I reached the stairs and came up into the open air, I saw it. The roof of Reactor 4 was gone. In its place was a column of fire shooting straight up into the night sky, bright blue and orange and white, so intense it hurt to look at. Pieces of graphite, chunks of the reactor core itself, were scattered across the ground, glowing like embers. The air smelled wrong, metallic and bitter, and I could taste it on my tongue immediately, that sharp, coppery flavor that I would later learn was the taste of ionized air, the taste of radiation ripping through matter at the atomic level. People were running in every direction, some toward the fire, some away. I heard someone shouting, "Get the hoses! Get water on it!" I heard another voice screaming, "Don't go near it! Don't touch anything!" And then I heard the voice of my shift supervisor, a man named Oleg Pavlovich, yelling at everyone to stay back, to wait for orders, to not panic. But panic was already everywhere. I stood there, frozen, staring at that fire, and all I could think was, my mother is 3 kilometers away. My mother is asleep in our apartment. My mother has no idea. I didn't go home that night. None of us did. Orders came down almost immediately. Seal off the area, account for all personnel, begin damage assessment. But the orders were confusing, contradictory. One officer told us to evacuate the building. Another told us to stay and help. A third told us the fire was under control and there was no danger. No danger. I remember those words because I heard them repeated over and over, even as men started vomiting in the bushes, even as the smell of burning graphite filled the air, even as the dosimeters, the few that were working, started clicking so fast they sounded like rain on a metal roof. I tried to call my mother from a phone in the administration building, but the lines were jammed. I tried again an hour later. Nothing. I finally got through around 4 in the morning. She answered, her voice thick with sleep. "Andre, what's wrong?" I didn't know what to tell her. I didn't know what was happening. "There's been an accident at the plant," I said. "Stay inside. Don't open the windows. I'll come home as soon as I can." "Is it bad?" she asked. I hesitated. I could hear the fear in her voice, the fear she was trying to hide. "I don't know," I said. "Just stay inside, please." "I will," she said. "Be safe, my son." Those were the last words I heard her speak in person. By the time I was finally released from my post, around 10 in the morning on April 26th, the city was already changing. The streets were quieter than they should have been. People were standing on their balconies, looking toward the plant, where smoke was still rising. Children were playing outside, which terrified me, because I knew by then that the air was poisoned, that every breath was pulling invisible particles into their lungs, into their blood, into their bones. I ran home. When I got to our apartment, my mother was sitting at the kitchen table, calm, drinking tea. The tulips I had left for her were in a vase by the window. "You look terrible," she said. "Sit down. I'll make you something to eat." "We need to leave," I said. "What?" "We need to leave Pripyat. Today. Now." She looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Andrei, what are you talking about?" "The reactor exploded," I said. "The core is exposed. The radiation—" "They said on the radio it was a small fire," she interrupted. "They said it's under control." "They're lying," I said. I sat down across from her, took her hands in mine. They were small, rough from years of work, warm and familiar. "Mama, I was there. I saw it. This is not a small fire. This is—" I didn't have the words. I still don't. How do you explain to someone that the air itself has become poison? That the ground beneath your feet is now a graveyard? That the city you love is already dead, even if it doesn't know it yet? "We'll wait and see," she said. "If it's really that bad, they'll tell us. They'll evacuate us." "And what if they don't?" I asked. She pulled her hands away, stood up, walked to the window. She looked out at the street, at the trees in bloom, at the life she had built here. "Your father is buried here," she said quietly. "I'm not leaving him." That was the beginning of the end for us. I spent the next 24 hours trying to convince her to leave, trying to explain what I had seen, what I knew, but she wouldn't listen. She kept repeating the same thing. "Your father is here. I won't leave him alone." On April 27th, the evacuation order finally came. It was announced over loudspeakers mounted on trucks driving through the streets. "Attention, residents of Pripyat. Due to the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, temporary evacuation measures are being implemented. Prepare to leave within 2 hours. Take only essential documents and items. You will be able to return in 3 days. 3 days. That's what they told us. 3 days. My mother heard the announcement. She stood in the doorway of our apartment, arms crossed, face set. "I'm not going," she said. "Mama, please." "No," I begged. I pleaded. I told her the truth as clearly as I could. I told her about the men who had already started dying, about the radiation levels that were climbing, about the graphite burning on the ground. She listened, but she didn't move. Finally, I said, "If you stay, you'll die." She looked at me with such sadness, such calm certainty, that I felt my heart break. "Then I'll die here," she said. "With him." I tried one more time. I grabbed her by the shoulders, looked into her eyes, and said, "I can't lose you too." She reached up, touched my face, and said, "You won't lose me. I'll always be with you. But you need to go. You need to live. Live for both of us." Outside, buses were lining up. Families were boarding, carrying suitcases, holding children, looking back at the city one last time. I stood there in that doorway, torn between staying with her and saving myself. She made the choice for me. She pushed me gently toward the stairs and said, "Go." I went. I boarded the bus, found a seat near the back, and watched through the window as our building disappeared behind the trees. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just sat there, numb, as the bus drove south toward Kiev, as Pripyat became smaller and finally vanished behind the forest. I never saw her again, not alive. For 40 years I carried that guilt, the guilt of leaving her behind, the guilt of not fighting harder, not refusing to go, not staying with her even if it meant dying together. I told myself she had made her choice, that I had respected it, that there was nothing else I could have done. But deep down, I knew I had abandoned her. And that knowledge ate at me every single day. I rebuilt my life in America. I met a woman named Sarah in Cleveland in 1991, got married, had 2 children. I worked as an electrical contractor, kept my head down, tried not to think about Pripyat, but I thought about it every day. I thought about my mother every day. I imagined her alone in that apartment, waiting, perhaps hoping I would come back for her. I imagined her walking to the cemetery, sitting beside my father's grave, talking to him as the radiation tore through her cells. I imagined her dying alone, in pain, with no one to hold her hand. And I hated myself for it. In 2026, just a few weeks ago, I received an email from a Ukrainian official working with the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone Authority. The subject line read, "Regarding remains found in Pripyat Cemetery." My hands shook as I opened it. The message was brief, clinical, bureaucratic. It said that during a routine survey and documentation effort in the exclusion zone, a team had discovered human remains at the site of the old Pripyat cemetery. The remains were found lying on top of a grave marked with the name Mykola Hrytsenko. A sealed envelope, partially protected by the body's position, had been recovered. The envelope was addressed to Andrei Hrytsenko. They asked if I was that person. I was. I replied immediately. Within a week, they had verified my identity through old Soviet records, immigration documents, and DNA samples I provided. The envelope was sent to me via diplomatic courier. It arrived in a plain brown package, wrapped in plastic, with official seals and stamps. I held it in my hands for a long time before I could bring myself to open it. The paper was yellowed, brittle, but still intact. The handwriting was my mother's, shaky, uneven, but unmistakably hers. The letter was dated May 15th, 1986, 19 days after the explosion, 19 days after I had left her. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where I eat breakfast every morning, where my grandchildren do their homework when they visit, and I read the letter. I'm going to share parts of it with you now, because I think you need to know, because the world needs to know. She wrote, "My dear Andrei, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and somehow you have found me. I hope you did not suffer too much wondering what happened to me. I want you to know that I am at peace. I am with your father now, and I am not afraid. I stayed because I could not leave him. You understand that, I think. You are a good son, and you respected my choice even though it hurt you. I do not regret staying. But I need to tell you something I heard before the evacuation, something that has weighed on me every day since. 3 days after the explosion, I went to the bread shop on Lenin Prospect. There were still a few shops open, still people trying to pretend everything was normal. I overheard 2 men talking. They were standing near the window, speaking quietly, but I was close enough to hear. One of them was wearing a uniform, military, I think, or maybe KGB. The other was in civilian clothes, but he had the look of someone important, someone used to giving orders. The man in uniform said, "They knew the test was dangerous. Fomin approved it anyway. He wanted the data, no matter the cost." The other man said, "Fomin is already being blamed, but it goes higher, you know that." The first man hesitated, then said, "Yes, I know." Then the second man said a name I had never heard before. He said it only once and quietly, but I heard it clearly. He said, "Alexandrov knew. Alexandrov approved it. And Alexandrov will never be held accountable." I don't know who Alexandrov is. I don't know what role he played. But I know what I heard. And I know that man spoke as if it were a fact, as if it was something everyone at a certain level understood, but would never say out loud. I am writing this down because I do not know if I will survive long enough to tell you in person. The radiation is making me sick. I feel it in my bones, in my stomach, in my chest. I know I am dying. But I wanted to leave you this truth, whatever it means. I wanted you to know that this was not just an accident. This was a choice. Someone chose to go ahead with that test. Someone chose to ignore the warnings. Someone chose to sacrifice us. Find out who Alexandrov is, Andrei. Find out what he did. And if you can, make sure the world knows. Not for revenge, not for justice. I don't believe in that anymore. But for the truth. Because the truth is all we have left. I love you, my son. I am proud of you. Live your life. Be happy. And when your time comes, remember that I will be waiting for you, together with your father, in a place where there is no more pain. Your mother, Helena. I sat there for a long time after I finished reading. The letter lay on the table in front of me, and I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Alexandrov. That name meant nothing to me in 1986. It means nothing to most people even now. But I started researching, I started digging, and what I found shook me to my core. Anatoly Petrovich Alexandrov was the president of the Soviet Academy of Sciences from 1975 to 1986. He was one of the most powerful scientists in the Soviet Union, a physicist who had worked on the Soviet atomic bomb project, a man who had been instrumental in the development of the RBMK reactor design, the same design used at Chernobyl. He was a chief proponent of nuclear energy, a man who publicly defended the safety of Soviet reactors even after the disaster. And according to some accounts I found, buried in declassified documents, in interviews with former Soviet officials, in the memoirs of scientists who worked under him, he had been informed of the inherent instability of the RBMK design years before Chernobyl. He knew about the positive void coefficient. He knew about the control rod design flaw. He knew that under certain conditions, the reactor could become uncontrollable. And he did nothing. Worse, he actively suppressed dissent. Engineers who raised concerns were reassigned. Reports that highlighted risks were buried. The reactor design was approved, replicated, and deployed across the Soviet Union because it was cheap, because it was fast to build, because it served the political goals of the state. And Alexandrov, as the head of the Academy of Sciences, gave it his blessing. When the disaster happened, he was not held accountable. He was not imprisoned. He was not even publicly blamed. He continued in his position until 1986, when he retired quietly. He died in 1994 at the age of 91, having never faced trial, never admitted fault, never apologized. My mother died alone in Pripyat, lying on my father's grave, because of decisions made by men like him. Men who knew the risks and chose profit over safety. Men who valued data over lives. Men who walked away clean while thousands died in agony. Now I want to ask you something. I want to know where you're watching this from. Comment below. Write down your country, your city, wherever you are. I need to know how far this truth is traveling. How many people in how many places are finally learning what really happened to us. Because the truth doesn't have a nationality, you understand? And this truth needs to be known everywhere. So write it down. I'm in Brazil. I'm in Portugal. I'm in Mexico. I'm in Germany. Wherever you are. Did you comment? Good. Stay with me. There's more you need to hear. After I found out about Alexandrov, I started reaching out to other survivors, other people who had been there, people who might remember something, anything that could confirm what my mother had heard. Most of them are dead now. Of the 47 electricians and technicians who were working in my section of the plant that night, only 6 are still alive. I contacted 3 of them. 1 didn't respond. 1 told me to stop digging, to let the past stay buried. But the 3rd, a man named Sergei Volkov, now living in Moscow, told me something that made everything click into place. He said that in the days before the test, there had been arguments among the senior engineers. Some of them wanted to delay it, to run more simulations, to wait for better conditions. But the orders came from above. The test had to happen on April 25th. It had to happen that night. Why? Because the reactor was scheduled for routine maintenance shutdown anyway, and the data from the test was needed for a report that was due in Moscow. A report that Alexandrov's office had requested. The test wasn't about safety. It was about proving a point, about meeting a deadline, about satisfying bureaucratic requirements. And when it went wrong, the people who ordered it disappeared into the background while the operators, men like Alexander Akimov and Leonid Toptanov, men who were just following orders, were blamed, vilified, and left to die in agony. Akimov died on May 11, 1986, 14 days after the explosion. Toptanov died on May 14th, 17 days after. Both of them were in their 30s. Both of them suffered radiation burns so severe that their skin fell off in sheets, that their internal organs liquefied, that they begged for death long before it came. I didn't know them personally, but I knew men like them. I worked alongside men like them. And they died because someone higher up decided their lives were worth less than a data point. That's what my mother wanted me to know. That's what she died trying to tell me. And now, 40 years later, I'm telling you. I went back to Pripyat in 2023. It was the first time I had been back since 1986. The exclusion zone is open now for guided tours, controlled visits, heavily monitored. I paid for a private guide, someone who could take me to the cemetery, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. The city is a ghost. The buildings are still standing, but they're hollow, empty, overtaken by trees and vines and silence. The amusement park that never officially opened, its Ferris wheel rusted and still, its bumper cars scattered like toys abandoned mid-game. The schools with textbooks still on the desks, gas masks still in the hallways. The apartments with furniture still in place, photographs still on the walls, lives frozen in time. We walked through the forest to the cemetery. It's overgrown now, barely recognizable, but the graves are still there, sunken and cracked, but there. I found my father's headstone. The name was worn but legible. Mykola Hrytsenko, 1932 to 1984. And next to it, in the grass, a slight depression in the earth. That's where they found her. My guide told me the recovery team had been documenting graves for a historical archive when they noticed the remains. They assumed at first it was a looter or someone who had died trying to scavenge from the zone in the early days. But the letter changed that. The letter made it clear. She had gone there deliberately. She had lain down beside him, and she had waited. I knelt down in that spot, in the dirt where my mother had spent her last moments, and I wept. I wept for her. I wept for my father. I wept for all the people who died because someone decided their lives didn't matter. And I wept for myself, for the 40 years I spent not knowing, not understanding, not having the chance to tell her I was sorry. But I also felt something else, relief, because she wasn't alone at the end. She was with him, and she had left me the truth. That was her final gift to me, the truth. Now I'm giving it to you. Alexandrov is dead. He died in '94, as I said, and he took his secrets with him. But history doesn't forget. Documents surface, witnesses speak, and the truth, no matter how long it takes, eventually comes out. My mother believed that. She believed it enough to write it down, to preserve it, to trust that someday someone would read it and understand. I'm that someone. And now, so are you. Agora continue para parte 3 e parte 4, com várias e várias contas para comentar. Inscrever-se, dá like, sempre de forma natural e espontânea, se ligando ao roteiro. Part 3. I need to tell you what happened in those first hours after the explosion, because that's when the lies started. And understanding those lies is the only way to understand why my mother's letter matters so much. When I ran up from the cable tunnels at 1:23 in the morning and saw that fire shooting into the sky, I wasn't the only one who knew immediately that something catastrophic had happened. Everyone knew. The operators who survived the initial blast knew. The firefighters who arrived within minutes knew. The plant directors who were called in from their homes knew. But knowing and admitting are two different things in the Soviet system. The first lie came at approximately 2 in the morning, less than 40 minutes after the explosion. I was standing with a group of other technicians near the administration building, waiting for instructions, when I heard Anatoly Dyatlov, the deputy chief engineer who had been supervising the test, shouting at someone on the phone. His exact words, I'll never forget them. "The reactor is intact. I've been down there. The reactor is intact." That was a lie. The reactor core was exposed, burning, spewing radiation into the atmosphere at levels that would have killed him in minutes if he had actually gotten close enough to see it. But he said it anyway, because admitting the truth would have meant admitting that the reactor design was flawed, that Soviet technology had failed, that the system itself was broken. And in the Soviet Union in 1986, you didn't say those things out loud if you wanted to survive. The second lie came around 4 in the morning. Someone, I don't know who, some official from the regional party committee, arrived and gathered us together. He told us the situation was under control, that the fire would be extinguished within hours, that radiation levels were elevated but not dangerous, and that we should all go home, wash up, and report back for our next scheduled shift. Under control, not dangerous. I looked around at the men standing with me. Some of them already had visible burns on their faces and hands from handling contaminated materials. Some of them were vomiting into the bushes. One man, a young turbine operator named Valentine, had a nosebleed that wouldn't stop. Blood was running down his chin, dripping onto his shirt, and he kept wiping it away with his sleeve, confused, frightened. Not dangerous. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab that official by his collar and drag him over to the reactor building and make him look at what was burning there, make him breathe that air, make him taste that metal in his mouth. But I didn't. Because I was 28 years old and terrified and conditioned by a lifetime of Soviet authority to obey, to stay quiet, to trust that someone above me knew better. So I went home. I tried to call my mother, and I waited for orders that made sense. They never came. By the morning of April 26th, the city was waking up to a beautiful spring day. The sun was shining, birds were singing, children were outside playing. And invisible particles of cesium-137, strontium-90, iodine-131, and plutonium-239 were falling from the sky like snow, settling on the playgrounds, the streets, the trees, the skin of everyone who walked outside. I stood at my window in our apartment and watched a group of kids playing soccer in the courtyard below. I wanted to run down there and scream at them to get inside, to warn their parents, to make them understand. But what could I say? I had no authority. I had no proof. I had only what I had seen, and the official story was already contradicting that. The official story, broadcast on the radio that morning, said there had been a minor accident at the plant, that a fire had been contained, that radiation levels were being monitored, and that there was no cause for alarm. No cause for alarm. My mother believed that broadcast. Most people did. Why wouldn't they? The government had never lied to them before, or, if it had, they had never been in a position to know the difference. And so life continued. People went to work, shops stayed open, schools held classes. A wedding took place in the Palace of Culture that afternoon. I saw the bride and groom walking down Lenin Prospect, smiling, surrounded by friends and family, while the invisible cloud drifted overhead. I wanted to stop them. I wanted to tell them to leave, to run, to get as far away as possible. But I didn't, because I was paralyzed by the same thing that paralyzed everyone else. The hope that maybe, somehow, the official story was true. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked. Maybe the experts knew something we didn't. Maybe we would wake up tomorrow and everything would be fine. We wouldn't. And it wasn't. Listen, I need to pause here for a second and ask you something. If this story is affecting you, if what I'm telling you is opening your eyes to something you didn't know before, do me a favor. Hit the like button on this video. I know that sounds trivial. I know it seems like a small thing, but it's not. Every like pushes this story to more people. Every like means one more person learns the truth that my mother died trying to preserve. So click that thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do that too. Because I have more to tell you, more truths that need to come out before it's too late, before the last of us are gone and there's no one left to remember. Did you do it? Good. Thank you. Now let me tell you what happened next. On the evening of April 26th, about 18 hours after the explosion, the first deaths began. Not from the explosion itself, Those had happened immediately, 2 men killed in the initial blast, but from acute radiation syndrome. The firefighters who had responded in the first minutes, who had climbed onto the roof of the turbine hall and sprayed water directly onto the burning reactor core, started collapsing. Lieutenant Vladimir Pravik, who led the 1st Fire Brigade, was brought to the Pripyat medical clinic around midnight. I heard about it from a nurse I knew, a woman named Svetlana who lived in my building. She came to my door, pale and shaking, and told me she had just finished her shift at the clinic. "They're dying, Andrei," she said. "The firefighters. They're dying and we don't know how to help them." She described symptoms I had never heard of before. Skin turning dark red, almost purple. Blisters forming and bursting. Vomiting that wouldn't stop. Uncontrollable diarrhea. Fainting. Seizures. Internal hemorrhaging. The doctors at the clinic had no idea what they were dealing with. They had no training in radiation medicine, no equipment to measure exposure, no protocols to follow. They did what they could. Fluids, painkillers, antibiotics. But it was like trying to stop a flood with a bucket. By the morning of April 27th, the clinic was full. More firefighters, plant workers, civilians who had been near the plant, all of them exhibiting the same terrifying progression of symptoms. And still, officially, there was no danger. Still, officially, the radiation levels were manageable. Still, officially, everything was under control. That's when the evacuation order finally came. 36 hours after the explosion. 36 hours of exposure for every person in Pripyat. 36 hours of breathing contaminated air, drinking contaminated water, eating contaminated food. 36 hours that would determine who lived and who died in the years to come. The announcement said we would be gone for 3 days, that we should take only essentials, that we would return soon. Another lie. We would never return. Pripyat would never be inhabited again. But they couldn't say that, because saying that would mean admitting how bad it really was, and admitting that would mean admitting they had failed to protect us. So they lied. And my mother, like thousands of others, believed them. Except she didn't plan to leave at all. I spent those 36 hours trying to convince her. I barely slept. I sat with her at the kitchen table, showing her the tulips I had bought her, now wilted and brown in their vase, and I said, "Look, even the flowers know something is wrong." She just smiled sadly and touched my hand. "Flowers die, Andrei. That's what they do." "Not in 2 days," I said. "Not like this." But she wouldn't listen. She had made up her mind. And when the buses arrived on the afternoon of April 27th, when the loudspeakers announced the temporary evacuation, when families started gathering in the streets with their bags and their children and their frightened faces, she stood firm. "I'm staying," she said. I begged her one last time. I got down on my knees in front of her, something I had never done before, and I said, "Please, Mama, please come with me. I can't lose you." She knelt down with me, put her hands on my face, and looked into my eyes. "You're not losing me," she said. "I'm letting you go. There's a difference." Then she stood up, pulled me to my feet, and pushed me gently toward the door. "Go," she said. "Live your life. Be happy. Find someone to love. Have children. Grow old. And when you think of me, don't think of this moment. Think of the good times. Think of your father and me dancing in the kitchen. Think of the summers we spent at the dacha. Think of the life we had before all this." I couldn't speak. I just nodded. She hugged me one last time, tight enough that I could feel her heartbeat against my chest, and then she let go. "Now go," she said, before I changed my mind. I walked out of that apartment, down the stairs, into the street. I got on the bus. I found a seat, and I watched through the window as Pripyat disappeared behind me. That was April 27th, 1986. I never saw her again. For 40 years, I lived with the guilt of that moment, the guilt of leaving, the guilt of not fighting harder, the guilt of surviving when she didn't. And I had no idea at all, that she had spent her final days uncovering a truth that would change everything. The letter my mother left didn't just contain the name Alexandrov. It contained something else, something I haven't told you yet. In the last paragraph, after she wrote about the conversation she overheard, she added this: "I have been walking to the cemetery every day since you left. The city is empty now. Everyone is gone. I am the only one here, I think, except for the soldiers at the checkpoints and the scientists in their protective suits. They tell me to leave when they see me, but I hide from them. I stay in the apartment during the day and go out at night. The radiation is worse at night, I think, because I feel sicker in the mornings. But I don't care anymore. I want to be with your father. Yesterday I saw something strange. There was a man at the cemetery, standing near the entrance, talking on a radio. He was in a military uniform, very high rank. I hid behind a tree and watched him. He was angry. He was shouting into the radio, saying something about cleanup protocols and liability exposure and documentation suppression. I didn't understand most of it. But then he said something that made me freeze. He said, "Alexandrov's office confirmed it. All records from the test are to be classified indefinitely. Anyone who talks gets transferred to Siberia, or worse." Then he looked around, as if he sensed someone watching, and I ran. I don't know if he saw me. I don't know if it matters. But I wanted you to know that I heard it, that it's not just rumor or speculation, that there is an active effort to hide what happened, to bury the evidence, to silence the witnesses. If you ever get the chance, Andrei, find those records. Find out what they're hiding. Not for me, for everyone who died, for everyone who will die, for the truth. When I read that part of the letter, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. My mother didn't just die alone in Pripyat. She died as a witness, and she left me a mission. Find the records. Find the truth. Expose it. So that's what I've been doing. For the past 3 months since I received that letter, I've been digging. Reaching out to archives, contacting historians, talking to former Soviet officials who are old enough now that they don't care about protecting reputations anymore. And I found something. Not the full records, those are still classified, buried somewhere in the Russian state archives, inaccessible to people like me. But I found pieces, fragments, enough to confirm what my mother heard. Before I go further, I want to ask you something. What's the most shocking part of this story for you so far? Is it that my mother stayed behind? Is it that she uncovered a cover-up? Is it that Alexandrov knew and did nothing? Comment below. Tell me what's hitting you the hardest, because I need to know that this is resonating, that people are paying attention, that this isn't just disappearing into the void. Write it down, whatever it is. The part about the firefighters dying in 14 days? The part about the lies in the first hours? The part about my mother hiding in the cemetery? Tell me. And while you're there, make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you've got notifications turned on. Because what I'm about to tell you next is going to shake you even more. Comment now, and let's keep going. The fragments I found came from 3 sources. The first was a declassified memo from 1987, released by the Ukrainian government in 2016 as part of a transparency initiative on the 30th anniversary of the disaster. The memo was written by a mid-level bureaucrat in the Soviet Energy Ministry, summarizing a meeting that took place in Moscow in June of 1986, 2 months after the explosion. The memo mentioned in passing that concerns raised by Academy President Alexandrov regarding RBMK operational parameters in 1983 were deemed administratively resolved and require no further review. 1983, 3 years before Chernobyl. Alexandrov had raised concerns, and they were dismissed. Administratively resolved. That's Soviet bureaucratic language for, we decided to ignore it. The second source was an interview I found in a Russian investigative journalism archive. It was conducted in 2004 with a retired physicist named Dr. Nikolai Dolezhal, who had worked under Alexandrov at the Kurchatov Institute in the 1970s and 80s. In the interview, Dolezhal said, and I'm translating from Russian here, "We knew the RBMK design had stability issues under low-power conditions. We knew the control rods had a dangerous insertion delay. We submitted reports. We ran simulations. But the political pressure to meet energy quotas was immense. Alexandrov was caught between scientific integrity and state demands. He chose the state. We all did." Chose the state. That's a polite way of saying he prioritized politics over safety, propaganda over truth, the appearance of Soviet technological superiority over the lives of the people who would pay the price. The third source was the hardest to obtain. It came from a former KGB archivist I tracked down through a contact in Germany. This man, who asked to remain anonymous, told me that in the immediate aftermath of Chernobyl, there was a coordinated effort to remove or reclassify any documentation that could be used to assign blame to high-level officials. He personally participated in the transfer of files from the Kurchatov Institute to a secure facility outside Moscow. Among those files, he said, were internal memos from Alexandrov's office dating back to 1981, including at least one marked "Urgent Review Required" regarding RBMK reactor safety under specific test conditions. Those files, he said, were never seen again. They weren't destroyed. Destroying official documents would have left a trail. They were simply reclassified into oblivion, buried under layers of secrecy that even the post-Soviet Russian government hasn't fully unwound. So here's what we know. Alexandrov knew there were problems with the RBMK design. He knew as early as 1981, possibly earlier. He raised concerns, but not loudly enough, not publicly enough. When those concerns were dismissed, he didn't push back. He didn't resign in protest. He didn't go to the press. He stayed in his position, accepted the decision, and allowed reactors with known flaws to continue operating. And when one of those reactors exploded, killing thousands, displacing hundreds of thousands, and contaminating an area the size of a small country, he quietly retired, lived out his days in comfort, and died without ever being held accountable. That's the truth my mother wanted me to find. That's the truth she died protecting. Now let me tell you about the people who paid the price for his silence. I mentioned earlier that of the 47 electricians and technicians in my section, only 6 are still alive. Let me tell you about some of the ones who aren't. There was Boris Petrovich, a senior electrician, 51 years old at the time of the disaster. He had 2 daughters and a son. He was assigned to the emergency crew that tried to restore power to the cooling systems in the first hours after the explosion. He received an estimated dose of 600 Roentgens. He died on May 21, 1986, 25 days after the explosion. His skin peeled off in sheets. His hair fell out in clumps. He vomited blood for 3 days straight before his organs finally shut down. He died alone in a hospital in Moscow because his family wasn't allowed to visit due to contamination protocols. There was Yuri Maximovich, a turbine technician, 33 years old. He had a wife and a newborn daughter. He was inside the turbine hall when the explosion happened. He ran outside to help evacuate others and was exposed to debris from the reactor core. Estimated dose, 800 Roentgens. He died on May 9, 1986, 13 days after the explosion. His wife tried to visit him in the hospital. They turned her away at the door. She never got to say goodbye. There was Grigory Stepanovich, a maintenance supervisor, 45 years old. He had 3 sons. He volunteered to go back into the plant on the night of April 26th to manually operate valves that had lost power. He knew it was a suicide mission. He did it anyway because he believed it would save the other reactors from failing. Estimated dose, 1,000 Roentgens. He died on May 7, 1986, 11 days after the explosion. Before he died, he told the nurse, "Tell my sons I was brave." Those are just 3. There were dozens more. Firefighters who responded in the first minutes, operators who stayed at their posts, volunteers who went into the reactor building to assess damage, helicopter pilots who flew over the exposed core to drop sand and boron, miners who dug tunnels under the reactor to install cooling systems, liquidators who shoveled radioactive graphite off the roof with their bare hands because the robots failed. Thousands of men who were sent into lethal radiation because someone decided the reactor was safe, because someone approved a test without proper precautions, because someone prioritized data over human life. And Alexandrov, the man who knew the risks, who had the authority to stop it, who could have demanded better designs, stricter protocols, more transparency, he walked away clean. No trial, no prison, no public accountability. He gave interviews after the disaster in which he defended the RBMK design. He called the explosion an operator error. He said the reactor was safe when operated correctly. He died in 1994 at 91 years old, having never admitted fault, never apologized, never acknowledged the blood on his hands. That's what my mother wanted the world to know. That's why she stayed behind. That's why she wrote that letter. Because she understood something I didn't understand until I read her words. The only thing more dangerous than a nuclear reactor is the lie that it's safe. I've been carrying that letter with me everywhere I go for the past 3 months. I keep it in a plastic sleeve in my jacket pocket, close to my heart. Sometimes I take it out and read it again, even though I've memorized every word. I read it because it's the last thing my mother gave me, the last proof that she existed, that she mattered, that she saw something true and refused to let it be buried. And I read it because it reminds me why I'm doing this, why I'm telling you this story, why I'm asking you to listen, to share, to remember. Because if we forget, it will happen again. It's already happening again. Look at Fukushima in 2011. Same pattern. Warnings ignored, safety concerns dismissed, corporate and government interests prioritized over public safety. Reactor meltdown, evacuation, contamination, lies. The Tokyo Electric Power Company knew the Fukushima Daiichi plant was vulnerable to tsunamis. Engineers had warned them. They did nothing. And when the tsunami hit and the reactors failed, they lied about radiation levels. They lied about the extent of contamination. They lied about how long it would take to clean up. Just like Chernobyl. Just like every nuclear disaster before and since. Because the people in charge, the Alexandrovs of the world, never pay the price. The workers do. The firefighters do. The families do. The mothers who refuse to leave their husbands' graves do. Okay, I need you to do something for me right now. If you've made it this far, if you've listened to this whole story and you're still with me, I need you to leave a comment. Write the word truth if you believe these stories need to be told. Write never again if you think we can't let this happen anymore. Write remember if you're going to carry this story with you. Any of those words. Or write what shocked you most, what made you angry, what broke your heart. Just don't stay silent, because silence is what they want. Silence is what lets them get away with it. Silence is what killed my mother. So comment. And if you haven't liked this video yet, do it now. And subscribe if you're not subscribed, because I'm not done. There's more you need to hear, more names you need to know, more lies you need to see through. Comment now. I'll wait. The last time I went to Pripyat, in 2023, I brought a small bouquet of flowers with me. Tulips. Yellow tulips. The same kind I bought for my mother on April 25th, 1986. I brought them to the cemetery, to the spot where they found her, and I laid them on the ground. The guide I was with asked me if I wanted a moment alone. I said yes. He walked away, back toward the entrance, and I knelt down in the dirt. I didn't pray. I've never been religious. But I spoke to her. I said, "I found it, Mama. I found what you wanted me to find. I know who Alexandrov was. I know what he did. And I'm telling the world, just like you asked." The wind moved through the trees. Bird song echoed in the distance. The forest has reclaimed Pripyat now. Nature doesn't care about radiation. It just grows, consumes, continues. But the cemetery is still there. The graves are still there. The memory is still there. And as long as people like me are alive, as long as people like you are listening, the truth is still there too. I stayed in that spot for almost an hour. I told her about my life, about Sarah, my wife, about our children, Daniel and Rebecca, about our grandchildren, about Cleveland, about my work, about the ordinary, beautiful, painful, complicated life I built after I left her behind. I told her I was sorry. Sorry for leaving. Sorry for not coming back. Sorry for taking 40 years to find the truth she died protecting. And I told her I forgave her for staying, forgave her for choosing my father over me, forgave her for making me live with that guilt all these years. Because I understand now. I understand that love isn't always about staying. Sometimes it's about letting go. Sometimes it's about making the hard choice, the impossible choice, so that someone else can survive. She let me go so I could live. And I'm living. I'm living for both of us, just like she asked. When I finally stood up to leave, I looked back one more time at that patch of ground, at the tulips I had left, already wilting in the contaminated soil. And I thought, nothing grows here anymore. Nothing lasts, except the truth. The truth lasts. The truth survives. And that's what I'm leaving you with today. The truth about Chernobyl. The truth about Alexandrov. The truth about my mother. The truth about the price ordinary people pay when powerful people lie. Don't forget it. Don't let it fade. Don't let the next Chernobyl happen because we were too afraid, too apathetic, too distracted to remember what happened the last time. Remember Pripyat. Remember Helena Hritsenko. Remember the 47 electricians, the firefighters, the operators, the liquidators. Remember the children who played in contaminated parks. Remember the mothers who couldn't say goodbye. Remember the truth. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying with me to the end. Now do me one last favor. Like this video. Share it. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and comment below. Tell me what this story meant to you. Tell me you'll remember. Tell me you'll pass it on. Because that's how the truth stays alive. That's how we honor the dead. That's how we make sure it never happens again. My name is Andriy Hritsenko. My mother was Helena Hritsenko. And this is her story. This is our truth. Don't let it die with me. I want to take a moment here before we close this chapter to talk about what all of this means. Not just for me, not just for my mother, but for you, for everyone watching this, for humanity itself. Because the story I've told you today isn't just about a nuclear disaster that happened 40 years ago in a country that doesn't even exist anymore. It's about something much bigger, much more fundamental, much more dangerous. It's about what happens when power prioritizes convenience over truth, when institutions value reputation over human life, when the people in charge decide that protecting themselves is more important than protecting the people they're supposed to serve. And that pattern, that deadly pattern, doesn't end with Chernobyl. It doesn't end with Alexandrov. It continues today, right now, in every corner of the world where someone in authority knows something is wrong and chooses to stay silent. Let me be very clear about the lesson here, because I think it's the most important thing I can leave you with. The lesson isn't that nuclear power is inherently evil or that technology will destroy us. The lesson is that truth, honest, uncomfortable, inconvenient truth, is the only thing that can save us. And when we allow truth to be suppressed, when we allow whistleblowers to be silenced, when we allow inconvenient facts to be buried under bureaucratic language and official denials, we are signing our own death warrants. My mother understood that. She understood it in a way I didn't fully grasp until I read her letter. She understood that staying behind, that refusing to run, that choosing to witness what was happening, even as it killed her, that was an act of resistance. Not against the radiation, you can't resist radiation, but against the lie, against the official story, against the machinery of power that grinds up ordinary people and then pretends it never happened. She stayed because she knew someone had to see, someone had to remember, someone had to write it down and leave it behind for people like me, people like you, to find. And now we have found it. Now we know. So what are we going to do with that knowledge? Here's what I want you to understand. Every single person who died in the Chernobyl disaster died because someone made a choice. Not the operators who ran the test, not the engineers who pushed the buttons. They were following orders, working with flawed equipment, operating under impossible conditions. No, the people who killed them were the ones who knew the reactor was dangerous and approved it anyway. The ones who knew the test was risky and ordered it to proceed. The ones who knew the explosion had happened and told the population it was safe. Those were choices, conscious, deliberate choices made by people who had the power to choose differently and didn't. Alexandrov had a choice. He could have refused to sign off on the RBMK design. He could have gone public with the safety concerns. He could have resigned in protest. He didn't. He chose his career, his reputation, his comfort. And 31 people died in the immediate aftermath. Thousands more died in the years that followed. Hundreds of thousands were displaced. An entire city was erased from the map. And he lived to 91, comfortable and honored, never facing justice. That's not an accident. That's not bad luck. That's a moral failure. A catastrophic, unforgivable moral failure. And it's a failure that repeats itself over and over again because we let it. We let powerful people escape accountability. We let institutions protect themselves instead of the public. We let the truth be buried because digging it up is uncomfortable, inconvenient, politically complicated. And then we act surprised when it happens again. Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, Bhopal, Deepwater Horizon. Every industrial disaster, every corporate cover-up, every government lie follows the same script. Warnings ignored, concerns dismissed, disaster strikes, officials deny. Truth emerges slowly. No one important gets punished. We promise it will never happen again. And then it does. The only way to break that cycle is to refuse to accept the lie, to demand accountability, to honor the witnesses, to tell the stories of the people who paid the price, people like my mother, people like the firefighters who ran toward the reactor, people like the operators who stayed at their posts, people like the liquidators who shoveled radioactive debris knowing it would kill them. They deserve to be remembered, not as statistics, not as unfortunate casualties of progress, but as human beings with names, with families, with lives that mattered, with truths that mattered. So let me tell you their names one more time. Boris Petrovich, Yuri Maximovich, Grigory Stepanovich, Helena Hritsenko, and the thousands more whose names I don't know, whose stories were never recorded, whose sacrifices were buried along with the truth. Before I finish, I want to ask you to do something. I've asked you several times already to like this video, to subscribe, to comment, and I hope you've done those things. But now I want to ask you for something more. I want you to share this video. Send it to someone you know. Post it on your social media. Send the link to a friend, a family member, a colleague. Because this story needs to reach as many people as possible. Not for me, not for my mother, but because the pattern I'm describing, the pattern of power silencing truth, is happening right now, today, in your country, in your community, maybe in your workplace. And the only defense we have against it is awareness. The only weapon we have is the truth. So share this video. And when you share it, tell people why. Tell them it's not just about Chernobyl. Tell them it's about what happens when we stop demanding honesty from the people in charge. Tell them it's about the price ordinary people pay when powerful people lie. Tell them it matters, because it does. It matters more than almost anything. And while you're at it, go through the comments on this video. Read what other people have written. See where they're watching from. See what parts of the story affected them. See how many people around the world are learning this truth for the first time. And then add your own comment. Tell me where you're from. Tell me what you're feeling. Tell me if you're angry, if you're sad, if you're motivated to do something. Tell me if you've had experiences in your own life where you saw power suppress truth, where you saw institutions protect themselves at the expense of ordinary people. Tell me your story, because this isn't just my story anymore. It's ours. It's the story of everyone who has ever been lied to by someone in authority. Everyone who has ever paid the price for someone else's greed or cowardice or ambition. Everyone who has ever fought to uncover a truth that powerful people wanted to keep buried. That's all of us. We're all part of this. So comment, share your truth. Add your voice to this growing chorus of people who refuse to stay silent. And listen, if you've watched this entire video from beginning to end, if you've stayed with me through all 5 parts, through every painful detail, through my mother's letter, through the names of the dead, through the lies and the cover-ups and the moral failures, if you've made it all the way here to the end, then you owe it to yourself and to everyone who died to do something with this knowledge. Don't just watch and forget. Don't just feel sad for a moment and then move on with your day. Let this change you. Let it make you more skeptical of official stories. Let it make you more demanding of accountability. Let it make you braver about speaking uncomfortable truths. Because that's what my mother did. She spoke an uncomfortable truth. She wrote it down when she could have just accepted her fate in silence. She preserved it when she could have let it die with her. She trusted that someday someone would find it and understand and carry it forward. I'm carrying it forward now, and I'm asking you to carry it forward with me. So here's what I want you to do. First, make sure you've subscribed to this channel. Click that button. Turn on notifications. Because I have more stories to tell, more truths to uncover, more names to speak. And I need you here to witness it, to amplify it, to make sure it doesn't disappear. Second, like this video. I know I've said it before, but I'm saying it again because it's important. Every like increases the reach of this story. Every like means one more person might stumble across it, might learn something they didn't know, might have their eyes open to a truth they had never considered. Third, comment. Write something, anything. Write where you're from. Write what shocked you. Write what you're going to do differently now that you know this. Write the names: Boris, Yuri, Grigory, Helena. Write truth, or remember, or never again. Just write something, because your comment is evidence that this story mattered to someone, that it reached someone, that it changed someone. And fourth, share this video. This is the most important one. Share it widely. Share it boldly. Share it with people who need to see it, even if they don't know they need to see it yet. Because the story of Chernobyl, the story of my mother, the story of Alexandrov, and the lies and the cover-up, it's not ancient history. It's a blueprint. It's a warning. It's a mirror showing us exactly what happens when we prioritize comfort over truth. When we let powerful people escape accountability, when we allow injustice to be normalized. Do those 4 things. Subscribe, like, comment, share, and then do one more thing. Remember. Remember this story. Remember these names. Remember what happened when truth was suppressed and lives were sacrificed. Remember so that the next time you hear an official denial, the next time you hear someone in authority say, "Everything is under control," when you can see with your own eyes that it's not. The next time you're told to trust the system when the system has proven itself untrustworthy. Remember Chernobyl. Remember Pripyat. Remember my mother. And refuse to accept the lie. Now let me give you the moral lesson at the heart of all of this. The one truth that encompasses everything I've told you today. Here it is. Your life is built on the choices of people you will never meet. The safety of your water, your food, your air, your energy, your medicine, all of it depends on decisions made by engineers, scientists, bureaucrats, executives, politicians, people whose names you don't know, whose faces you've never seen, whose motivations you can't evaluate. And most of the time, those people do their jobs honestly. Most of the time, the system works. But sometimes, it doesn't. Sometimes, someone in that chain of trust makes a choice that prioritizes something else: profit, reputation, political convenience, career advancement, over your safety. And when that happens, people die. The only defense you have, the only defense any of us have, is a culture that punishes lies and rewards truth. A culture that holds powerful people accountable. A culture that listens to whistleblowers instead of silencing them. A culture that values transparency over secrecy, honesty over convenience, human life over institutional reputation. We don't have that culture yet. Not fully, not consistently. But we can build it. One story at a time. One act of courage at a time. One person refusing to stay silent at a time. My mother was one of those people. She refused to run. She refused to forget. She refused to let the truth die with her. I'm trying to be one of those people too. And I'm asking you to be one as well. Not by doing something grand or heroic, not by putting yourself in danger, but by doing the small, simple, accessible thing, by refusing to look away, by listening to uncomfortable truths, by sharing stories that need to be told, by demanding better from the people in power, by remembering. That's how we honor the dead. That's how we protect the living. That's how we make sure Chernobyl wasn't meaningless, that my mother's death wasn't in vain, that the 40 years I spent carrying guilt and grief led to something that mattered. I'm 68 years old now. I don't know how much time I have left. None of us do. But I know this. When my time comes, I want to be able to face my mother again, wherever she is, and tell her I did what she asked. I found the truth. I spoke it. I made sure people heard it, and I trusted them to carry it forward. So I'm trusting you now. I'm trusting that you won't let this story end here. I'm trusting that you'll take it with you, that you'll share it, that you'll let it inform how you see the world, how you evaluate authority, how you respond when you're told to trust blindly and not ask questions. I'm trusting that some of you, maybe just a few, maybe more, will be changed by this, will be a little braver, a little more skeptical, a little more willing to demand accountability, a little more committed to truth. That's all I can ask for. That's all my mother would have asked for. Before I go, let me say thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring enough to stay with me through this long, painful, necessary story. Thank you for honoring my mother's memory by hearing her truth. Thank you for honoring the dead by remembering their names. Thank you for being here. I know there are a million other things you could be watching right now. A million easier, more entertaining, less emotionally demanding things. But you chose this. You chose to spend your time learning about something that happened 40 years ago to people you never met in a place you'll probably never visit. And that choice matters. That choice means something. That choice is an act of witness, an act of solidarity, an act of resistance against forgetting. So thank you, truly, from the bottom of my heart. Now, one more time, because I need to know this message is spreading. Like this video if you haven't already. Subscribe to this channel if you're not subscribed. Comment below with your thoughts, your location, your reaction. And share this video. Send it to at least one person. Just one. That's all I ask. One person who needs to hear this story. One person who might not know about Chernobyl, or who knows the official version, but not the truth. One person who could benefit from understanding how power operates, how lies spread, how ordinary people pay the price for extraordinary failures. Share it with that one person. And if everyone watching does that, this story will reach thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. And that will be my mother's legacy. Not a body found lying on a grave in an abandoned city. Not a victim forgotten by history, but a witness whose testimony reached across 4 decades, across oceans and borders and languages, to tell the truth to people who needed to hear it. That's what she deserves. That's what they all deserve. So please, do this for them. Do this for her. Do this for the next generation, so they don't have to learn these lessons the hard way. so they inherit a world that values truth over power, accountability over convenience, human life over institutional survival. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Remember, that's how this story stays alive. That's how the truth survives. That's how we honor the dead and protect the living. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. My name is Andrei Ritsenko. My mother was Halina Ritsenko. And together, we've told you the truth about Chernobyl, about Alexandrov, about the lies that killed thousands and the silence that let it happen. Don't let that truth die here. Carry it forward. Pass it on. Make it matter. That's all I ask. That's all any of us can ask. Thank you, and may we never forget.